Imagine being in just the darkest, most chaotic moment of your life.
Yeah, like everything is just completely falling apart.
Right. You are surrounded by people actively plotting your ruin. Your reputation is being shredded. Your resources are, well, they're entirely depleted.
And you're feeling that visceral, suffocating weight of sheer panic.
Exactly. Now imagine that your response to that utter chaos is to sit down and write a mathematically perfect, alphabetically rigid, architecturally symmetrical poem about the experience.
Which is just, I mean, it sounds almost psychotic to our modern sensibilities.
It really does. When we are suffering, our words are fragmented. We scream, we weep. We certainly don't start mapping out Hebrew acrostic.
No, definitely not.
But that tension, the violent collision of raw human agony and sovereign structural order, is exactly what is happening in the ancient text we are pulling apart today. So welcome to this deep dive into Reformed thinking.
It completely shatters the modern assumption that poetry, especially biblical poetry, is just about unbridled emotional expression.
Right, because we tend to approach these texts looking for a quick, sentimental burst of inspiration.
We want a verse we can put on a coffee mug.
Exactly. But when you apply the kind of rigorous theological and structural analysis we find in R.C. Sproul's notes from the Reformation Study Bible, you realize you aren't looking at a simple painting.
No, you are walking into a massive, intricately engineered cathedral.
Which is precisely our mission for this deep dive. We are stripping away the sentimental reading of Psalm 9 to examine the hidden architecture underneath.
Because there is so much there.
There really is. The study notes reveal a masterclass in cosmic justice, a deeply uncomfortable definition of what it actually means to be poor, and a brilliant spatial contrast between life and death.
But to grasp any of that, we really have to start with a foundational shocker that completely redefines the boundaries of the text itself.
Right, because if you just open a Bible to Psalm 9, you are only looking at half the building.
You are looking at a fragment.
A fragment, yeah.
The historical and grammatical evidence strongly suggests that Psalms 9 and 10 were originally composed and sung as a single, unified piece of literature.
Which is fascinating.
It is. If you look at the original Hebrew Psalter, titles or superscriptions are incredibly common. They give musical directions or, historical context.
Like to the choir master or setting the historical scene.
Exactly. Psalm 9 has one. Psalm 10 does not. It is an orphan psalm.
And in the meticulous, highly organized world of Hebrew poetry, that means something, right?
But a missing title is a massive structural indicator. It points backward, signaling that the text is a continuation of the previous thought.
But it's not just a missing title that binds them together. There is a skeletal system running beneath both chapters.
Yes, there is.
The study notes identify this unified text as a massive alphabetical acrostic.
And we should probably explain the mechanics of that because it is far more than a clever literary trick.
Yeah, break that down for us.
So, the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters, from Aleph to Tav. In a standard acrostic, the first line or stanza begins with the first letter, the second with the second, and so on.
Moving methodically through the entire alphabet?
Right. It was used partly as a mnemonic device to help ancient worshippers memorize the text.
Which makes sense for an oral culture.
Exactly. But theologically, it communicates a sense of total completeness. Covering a topic from A to Z, or Aleph to Tav, means that you are expressing the exhaustive, total reality of the subject.
So when a psalmist uses an acrostic to write about suffering and God's justice, they are essentially saying, this is the complete, comprehensive anatomy of my despair and God's sovereignty.
That's a great way to put it.
But as the study notes point out, the structure of Songs 9 and 10 is even more complex than just a straight alphabetical list. It's built on a concentric arrangement.
Right, often referred to as a chiasm.
It's chiasm, yeah. For those listening, if you are visualizing this, picture a massive suspension bridge or maybe a carefully engineered archway.
Yeah, an archway works perfectly. A chiasm organizes text so that the first part mirrors the last part.
And the second part mirrors the second to last part.
Exactly. And everything drives inward toward its central focal point that bears the weight of the entire structure.
Let's map that out over these two psalms. The outer anchor points, the foundation stones of our archway, so to speak, are hymns of praise to the divine king.
Right. That's Psalm 9, verses 1 through 12 on the front end, and Psalm 10, verses 16 through 18 on the back end.
Okay, so moving one step inward from those anchors, you find matching pleas for God to intervene and aid his people.
Those are your supporting pillars. You have Psalm 9, verses 13 through 20 on one side, and Psalm 10, verses 12 through 15 on the other.
And both of those sections are direct, urgent appeals for salvation.
Which brings us to the keystone, the dead center of the entire structure.
Locked between the pillars of plea and the foundations of praise.
Right. And that center is Psalm 10, verses 1 through 11.
And what's wild is that section is this dark, agonizing lament concerning the unchecked prosperity and arrogance of the wicked.
It is. And here is where the mechanics of the acrostic become profoundly moving.
Oh, I love this part.
As the poem moves into that central lament, as the psalmist describes the wicked hunting down the vulnerable and boasting that God doesn't care, the perfect alphabetical order actually starts to break down.
Letters are skipped. The rigid structure fractures.
Exactly.
That gives me chills, honestly. The literary structure literally mirrors the psychological and spiritual state of the author.
It really does. When he is staring into the abyss of human wickedness, the order of his world breaks down, and the poetry just fractures along with it.
But, and this is key, it doesn't stay fractured.
No, it doesn't. As the psalmist moves out of the lament, back into the plea for help, and finally resolves into the concluding hymn of praise, the acrostic structure picks back up.
The missing letters return. The alphabet concludes perfectly.
It does. And that answers the question of why someone would use such rigid math for such raw suffering.
Because the medium is the message. By forcing his chaotic grief into this highly ordered, perfectly symmetrical chiasm, the psalmist is making a massive theological statement about God's sovereignty.
Yes. The chaos is real. It even breaks the meter for a moment. But the chaos is contained.
It is bracketed by praise. It is held within the boundaries of a sovereignly designed order.
The structure itself preaches to you, the reader, before you translate a single word of theology.
Right. It declares that human suffering, no matter how chaotic it feels, does not ultimately break the sovereign order of God. The archway holds.
It holds.
That is just an incredibly robust way to view our own seasons of distress. And it fundamentally changes how we approach the very first movement of this poem.
It really reorients everything.
Praise in Psalm 9, verses 1 through 12.
Because if you read this with a modern Western mindset, it just sounds like generic religious gratitude.
Right. The psalmist says in verse 1, I will recount all of your wonderful deeds. And we hear wonderful deeds and think of, like, a beautiful sunset.
Or a vague feeling of spiritual peace.
Yeah. Which completely strips the text of its historical weight.
It absolutely does. The Hebrew word used here for wonderful deeds, pala, is deeply specific.
How so?
Well, in the context of Israel's worship, this term is almost exclusively reserved for the massive, objective, redemptive historical interventions of God.
So, not just a nice feeling.
No. The study notes specifically root this concept in the Exodus from Egypt.
Oh, wow. So we were talking about the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the physical destruction of Pharaoh's army.
We are talking about public, verifiable history.
Right.
The psalmist isn't praising God for his subjective inner feeling. He is anchoring his worship in the objective reality that God has definitively reached into space and time.
He dismantled a world superpower.
And liberated his covenant people. That historical reality is the absolute bedrock of Reformed theology.
Which is huge for us to remember. Our faith is not based on philosophy.
Right, it is based on historical events where God acted as the righteous judge.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense when looking backward at the Exodus, but this is where I have to push back a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
Because the text does something deeply uncomfortable with the concept of time here.
It does play with timelines, yeah.
In verse 3, the psalmist says, when my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish before your presence. But the study notes highlight a glaring reality.
Which is that the enemies haven't actually turned back yet.
Exactly. The psalmist is actively being hunted. The danger is present right now. So this statement in verse 3 is entirely a declaration of future hope.
It is a future certainty spoken of as a present reality.
But I mean, doesn't that just sound like a psychological coping mechanism?
How do you mean?
Like if my bank account is overdrawn and the repo man is towing my car and I stand in my driveway shouting, I praise God because I am a millionaire, that isn't faith, that's delusion.
Sure, yeah.
If the psalmist is literally surrounded by murderous enemies, how is praising God for their defeat any different from someone just wishing really hard for a reality that doesn't exist.
The difference lies entirely in the object of the confidence.
Unpack that.
In your analogy, the delusion comes from placing confidence in a desired circumstantial outcome, winning the lottery, or magically getting out of debt.
Right, stuff I have no control over.
You have no objective basis to guarantee that outcome. But look at verse 4. The psalmist says, "For you have maintained my just cause. You have sat on the throne giving righteous judgment."
Okay.
The psalmist's confidence is not anchored in a blind optimism that his circumstances will magically improve. His confidence is anchored in the immutable, unchangeable character of the righteous judge.
Unpack immutability for a second in this context, just so we're all on the same page.
Right, so immutability means God's nature cannot and will not change. He does not evolve.
He does not learn new things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He does not have good days and bad days. If God fundamentally operates as a righteous judge who restores order, as demonstrated objectively in the historical Exodus,
Right.
and if God's character cannot change, then his future justice is as mathematically certain as his past justice.
Wow. So the psalmist can speak of future deliverance in the present tense because the God who decrees the future is already sitting on the throne.
Yes.
So if God decrees a thing from a cosmic perspective, it is as good as done. It's almost like a master chess player who announces checkmate in 5 moves.
That's a great analogy.
The opponent is still moving pieces, the game is technically still happening, but the reality of the defeat is already locked in because of the superior mind of the player.
That captures it perfectly. The psalmist sees the checkmate. The enemies are still maneuvering. They're still a threat. But their doom is a theological certainty based on who is sitting across the board.
And what does that doom actually look like? Verse 8 says, God judges the world, which, we often reduce to a purely punitive concept.
Yeah, we think of a judge banging a gavel and handing out prison sentences.
Exactly. But the study notes define this judgment much more broadly. To judge the world in the biblical sense means putting everything into right order.
Right, it is the restoration of shalom. Sin, by its very nature, is a chaotic rebellion against the created order.
It is an infection that breaks down the structural integrity of the world.
Yes. So when God acts as the righteous judge, he isn't just angrily swatting down rule breakers. He is actively realigning the cosmos back to its intended perfect geometry.
And part of that realignment necessitates the removal of the agents of chaos.
It has to, yes.
Which brings us to the really chilling imagery in verse 5.
Oh, this verse is intense.
The psalmist writes that God has rebuked the nations, made the wicked perish, and here's the phrase, he has blotted out their name forever and ever.
Cosmic erasure.
Yes, cosmic erasure. Contrast that with verse 2, where the psalmist declares he will sing praise to God's name forever.
Because in the ancient world, your name was your legacy, your essence, your claim to immortality.
Right. The wicked spend their lives building empires, stamping their names on monuments, trying to secure their own eternal relevance through power and oppression.
But when the righteous judge puts the world back into order, all of that striving is just wiped from the ledger.
It's not just that they are punished, it's that their entire project of self-deification is rendered null and void. They are blotted out.
While the name of the Lord, the only true source of order, endures forever.
This theology is just soaring. We are talking about cosmic erasure, eternal thrones, and the geometric ordering of the universe.
It's massive.
But if we are honest, a God who operates purely on a cosmic scale can feel terrifyingly distant.
Very true.
You think of a CEO managing a multinational conglomerate from a boardroom thousands of miles away.
Right, looking at spreadsheets.
Yeah. He might be balancing the corporate books perfectly, but he doesn't know the names of the people working on the factory floor.
He doesn't see their day-to-day struggles.
Right. So if God is just this massive cosmic force restoring order, does this theology actually offer any comfort to the guy currently getting crushed by his enemies?
Well, that tension between God's massive transcendence and his intimate presence is the central heartbeat of the Psalter.
It really is.
And the text anticipates exactly that fear. In verse 11, the camera violently zooms in.
Oh, I love that. The psalmist shifts from describing God judging the nations to declaring that the same God is enthroned in Zion.
Yes, and we really need to focus on the theological weight of Zion here.
Right, because for the ancient Israelite, Zion wasn't just a zip code in Jerusalem.
Not at all. Zion is the focal point of the cosmos. It is the resting place of the Ark of the Covenant.
It represents the localized presence of the infinite God.
Exactly. In ancient Near Eastern cosmology, a temple wasn't just a place where you went to sing songs. It was the literal intersection of heaven and earth.
So when the text says the cosmic judge is enthroned in Zion, it is making a radical claim about imminence.
It is. The God who blots out nations has planted his command center right in the middle of human history, right among his covenant people.
He isn't managing the universe from a distance. He is deeply, intimately local.
Yes.
And because he is local, his execution of justice becomes intensely personal. Look at verse 12.
This is such a crucial verse.
It forces us to rethink everything we assume about divine justice. The English Standard Version translates it as God avenges blood.
But the study notes draw attention to the literal Hebrew translation, which is that God seeks blood.
God seeks blood.
That specific phrasing invokes the ancient Israelite legal concept of the Gol Hadam.
The blood avenger.
Exactly.
And when we think of seeking justice, we often picture a TV detective looking for clues. But the Gol Hadam was much more severe.
Very different from a standard detective.
Right, if you want a modern equivalent, think of a ruthless, uncompromising forensic auditor.
Oh, that's good.
You know, the kind of auditor who walks into a corrupt corporation, locks the doors, and traces every single missing penny, every shredded document, every hidden transaction.
They don't care about excuses.
No. They care about balancing the ledger with absolute perfection.
And contrast that with human justice systems, which are incredibly flawed.
We lose evidence. Statutes of limitation expire.
People who have been abused or oppressed often have to watch their abusers walk away unpunished.
And they are left feeling like the universe simply doesn't care.
But the text insists the universe has a memory, because God is keeping the books.
When the text says God seeks blood, it means he's auditing the cosmos.
The notes actually cross-reference Genesis 9, the covenant with Noah, and the prophecy of Nahum here.
Which establishes that the taking of innocent life, the shedding of blood, creates a moral debt in the universe that God simply refuses to overlook.
He actively hunts down the injustice to set it right. He requires an accounting for the vulnerable who have been crushed.
And it is right here, immediately after declaring that God seeks the blood of the oppressed, that the psalmist finally drops his own mask.
This is where we move into the second movement of the chiasm.
Right, the plea for aid in verses 13 through 20. And the psalmist's personal agony breaks through the surface.
It becomes very raw.
In verse 13, he begs God to see his affliction and says, "O you who lift me up from the gates of death."
This is the turning point of the poem's spatial geometry. We have talked about the throne, we have talked about Zion, but now we are introduced to the gates.
The ancient city gate was the nexus of civic life.
It was where the elders sat, where court was held, where business was transacted.
It was the absolute hub of community.
Which makes the phrase gates of death so horrifying.
Right.
The gates of death, or Sheol, the grave, represent the ultimate anti-community. They represent total isolation, silence, and the complete severing of relationships.
And the psalmist feels the gravitational pull of that isolation. He feels his enemies dragging him away from the land of the living and locking him behind those silent gates.
But the brilliance of the poetry is how it immediately contrasts the gates of death with a different set of gates in the very next breath.
I love the whiplash here. In verse 14, he pleads to be saved so that in the gates of the daughter of Zion, I may rejoice in your salvation.
The juxtaposition is stunning.
It is.
You have the gates of death, silent, dark, isolating.
Yeah.
And you have the gates of the daughter of Zion, vibrant, loud, completely public.
The gates of Zion represent the covenant community gathered together to publicly declare the faithfulness of God.
It's a spatial representation of salvation.
The psalmist isn't just asking to not die, he is asking to be relocated.
Yeah.
He is saying, pull me out of the isolation of suffering and place me directly in the center of the community so I can tell everyone that the righteous judge audited my case and saved my life.
And that raises the inevitable question. If the psalmist is being relocated to safety, what happens to the people who are trying to drag him down?
What is the fate of the wicked? Verse 15 gives us the answer, and it introduces one of the most profound realities of biblical justice. It says, the nations have sunk in the pit that they made. In the net that they hid, their own foot has been caught.
The study notes connect this motif to Psalm 7, and it touches on a deeply Augustinian understanding of the nature of evil.
Which is that evil is not an independent, creative force.
Exactly. It is parasitic. It is a corruption of good, and therefore it is inherently self-destructive.
The boomerang effect of sin.
Precisely. The enemies of God exhaust their energy, digging pits, setting snares, crafting elaborate schemes to trap the righteous.
But the moral geometry of a universe is designed in such a way that rebellion collapses in on itself.
God's judgment often consists simply of handing the wicked over to the logical conclusion of their own choices.
The traps they build become their own prisons.
Yes.
They dig a pit for the righteous, and gravity does the rest.
And the text doesn't leave the identity of these people ambiguous either.
No, it doesn't. Verse 17 defines the wicked as all the nations that forget God and says their ultimate destination is a return to Sheol.
We really need to pause on the phrase forget God because in our modern lexicon, forgetting is a passive mistake.
Like you forget your password, you forget a birthday.
Right. It implies innocence.
But in the biblical lexicon, forgetting God is an act of violent, willful suppression.
It's Romans 1. It is knowing the truth and actively holding it down.
Yes, it is looking at the sovereign order of the righteous judge and choosing to live as an autonomous law unto yourself.
To forget God is to build your life, your politics, and your ethics as if he does not exist.
And the tragic irony is that if you spend your life actively trying to erase God from your reality, God will ultimately grant your request.
You will be sent to Sheol, the place of ultimate separation from him.
Which brings us to the zenith of this entire deep dive. If the wicked are defined by their arrogant self-reliance, who are the righteous?
Well, in verse 18, after detailing the self-destruction of the nations, the text pivots sharply to two very specific words.
The needy and the poor.
Right.
Verse 18 says, "For the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish forever."
The Hebrew words here are ebion, which means the needy, and ani, the poor or afflicted.
And as the study notes emphasize, this phrase is a major fixed theological category in the Old Testament.
It is everywhere in the prophets and the Psalms.
But this is where modern readers stumble hard. When we hear poor, we think entirely in socioeconomic terms.
We pull out tax brackets.
Yeah, we think about material assets. But the notes make a crucial, nuanced distinction here, which is that poverty itself is not meritorious.
That is a vital point to underline. Having a zero balance in your checking account does not automatically make you spiritually pure.
Poverty does not earn you salvation.
No, it doesn't.
So if simply being broke doesn't buy you favor with God, why are the poor and needy positioned throughout Scripture as the specific demographic that God relentlessly defends?
Because while the terms absolutely encompass literal, material poverty and God's heart for the materially destitute is undeniable.
Right.
The words are used figuratively to describe a much deeper spiritual reality, which is utter, total dependence on God.
Total dependence.
Think about what wealth does in a fallen world. Wealth provides an illusion of control.
It really does.
If you have enough money, enough power, enough influence, you can buffer yourself against the chaos of life.
You can buy good health care, hire lawyers, live behind gated communities.
You can function under the delusion that you are sovereign over your own life.
Which is exactly what the wicked nations were doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But literal poverty strips away that illusion. When you are the anoem, the oppressed, the afflicted, the marginalized, you have no buffers.
You have no earthly safety net.
And in that crucible of physical deprivation, you are forced into a posture of absolute spiritual clarity.
Which is that if the king enthroned in Zion does not intervene, you will die.
You bring nothing to the table. You are spiritually bankrupt.
This is the exact theology Jesus is building on in the Sermon on the Mount when he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven."
Yes, God gives special attention to the poor and needy because they embody the exact posture required to receive grace, which is empty hands.
The wicked forget God because their power convinces them they don't need him.
And the poor and needy remember God because he is the only asset they have left.
And this reality completely upends how we're supposed to view human power.
It flips it on its head.
The study notes highlight an incredible connection to the prophet Jeremiah here. Jeremiah explicitly equates bringing justice to the poor and needy with the very act of knowing God.
Let's drill down into that because the political and social implications are staggering.
They are. Jeremiah 22 is addressing the kings of Judah.
He is contrasting King Josiah, who did justice for the poor, with his son Jehoiakim, who built his palace through oppression.
Right, and God says through Jeremiah, he judged the cause of the poor and needy. Then it was well. Is not this to know me?
Is not this to know me?
The way you treat the utterly dependent is the supreme diagnostic test of your theology.
It proves whether you actually understand the character of the God you claim to worship.
Exactly.
If you claim to follow a God who is a righteous judge, a God who audits the cosmos for the blood of the vulnerable, a God who gives his kingdom to those with empty hands, but you use your own power to ignore, exploit, or marginalize the weak, you are proving that your theology is a fraud.
You do not know him.
You cannot separate your orthodoxy from your ethics.
That is deeply convicting. The litmus test for our faith isn't just our ability to parse Hebrew acrostic.
As fun as that is.
Right. It's our posture toward the people who have absolutely nothing to offer us in return, because God is the defender of those who cannot defend themselves.
Which perfectly frames the final desperate cry of this section.
Yeah, let's look at that.
After unpacking this massive theology of cosmic judgment, local presence, and total dependence, the psalmist issues a single one-word command to God in verse 19.
Arise.
Just arise, O Lord, let not man prevail.
The notes direct us back to Psalm 3 for this motif. It is the ultimate expression of the poverty of spirit we just discussed.
It really is. After laying out the entire case, the psalmist doesn't say, okay, God, give me a sword and I'll go fix this.
No, he says, I am powerless. The only way this resolves is if you stand up.
It is the plea of the creature asking the Creator to step into the timeline and act.
It is the cry of someone who finally understands that they cannot save themselves.
Yes.
Well, let's synthesize the ground we've covered today, because it's been a lot.
A ton of ground.
We started by discovering that Psalms 9 and 10 are actually a massive, beautifully engineered architectural unit, an acrostic chiasm that takes the raw, fractured chaos of human suffering and forces it into the unyielding boundary of God's sovereign order.
We explored a God who doesn't just hand out generic blessings, but who intervenes in history with objective, redemptive power.
We saw that because his character as a righteous judge is immutable. We can treat future hope not as a delusion, but as a guaranteed checkmate.
We traced his presence from the cosmic throne down into the localized intimacy of Zion, where he operates as the relentless forensic auditor, seeking the blood of the oppressed.
We witnessed the spatial geometry of salvation moving from the isolated silence of the gates of death into the vibrant public worship at the gates of Zion.
We watched the self-destructive nature of evil collapse in on itself in the pit.
And finally, we realized that biblical poverty isn't just a socioeconomic status.
Right.
It is a profound, required posture of total dependence on a king who demands that his followers treat the vulnerable with the same fierce, protective love that he does.
When you unpack it like this, it ceases to be a simple song. It becomes a comprehensive blueprint for viewing reality.
It really does. And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to wrestle with, something that challenges the very foundation of how most of us live.
This is a tough one.
It is. The study notes made it unequivocally clear that being poor and needy is a profound, figurative expression for living in a state of utter, unbroken dependence on God. Now, look at our modern world. Look closely at your own daily rhythms.
It's quite the contrast.
The vast majority of our time, our energy, our education, and our anxiety is spent trying to achieve the exact opposite of that dependence.
We are obsessed with self-reliance.
We build massive financial portfolios, we curate powerful social networks, we pursue titles and influence, all to construct a buffer so thick that we never have to truly depend on anyone.
Our ultimate cultural goal is to never feel poor, to never feel needy, to be completely autonomous.
But if God's specialized attention, his deepest intimacy, and his fiercest defense are reserved for those who are totally dependent on him, how much of God's presence are we actively insulating ourselves against?
That's a profound question.
By constantly building our own strength and securing our own safety nets, are we accidentally pushing ourselves out of the category of the anoim? Are we becoming so functionally self-sufficient that we are forgetting how to cry, arise?
That is the defining question for the modern believer. Are we willing to surrender the illusion of control to experience the reality of his presence?
It changes everything about how we view our weaknesses. We don't want to just appreciate the poetry. We want our lives to reflect the architecture of total dependence.
Yeah, that's it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it has dismantled your assumptions, encouraged your faith, and pointed you directly toward the righteous judge. Thank you for exploring Reformed thinking with us.